All right, so now we're going to talk about cultural considerations for health promotion. So, understanding one's own culture as well as others is fundamental to providing culturally competent nursing care. And you might think, oh, well, I don't have a specific culture, but everyone does, right? And you have to understand what culture means for you to find what your own culture is. So, there are three different definitions as a noun, verb, or adjective. And here is how it's defined. It's norms of a particular group that guide behavior, give meaning to life, and are transmitted through generations. Dynamic adaptation, learned ways of life. It reflects attitudes, morals, beliefs, your values, your ideals, your knowledge, your symbols, your artifacts, customs, and traditions. Some people's culture might seem thicker to you because maybe you were raised in a culture that's been around for generations versus maybe seeing some of your friends whose culture is newer to you and unfamiliar. So you think that they have a specific culture, but everyone has one, right? There's even cultures that go as deep as a business culture, right? So let's compare different business cultures just so you can get an idea. So a place like Google, they believe in letting their workers take naps, fostering communication. They don't have offices. Everybody's in the same area and bounce ideas off each other. Whereas, look at General Electric. Everyone has their own office. You have managers. They do not have nap pods. They don't encourage open hours. They encourage you to come in 8 to 5. Now, I know some places in GE have changed. I'm just trying to show you, but that's a culture issue. That's a culture belief, right? Maybe you might tell me, well, where I work, nobody wants to do projects or, progress in their degree. That's a culture belief for where you work. But when we talk about families, people have different cultures in their family. And I'll share with you a little about me. So my parents are both from, my dad is from Cuba, my mom is Peruvian. My dad grew up in Peru, and they came to the States and went to school here and got married. So I was raised in two cultures. I was raised in what I think is American culture, and many of you might say, well, you were raised in like Midwest Ohio culture. And then I was also raised in my parents' Latino culture. So it wasn't a cultural norm to do sleepovers growing up. So that was different for my parents. That was something they had to decide if they were going to adapt or not adapt. And now the culture has shifted in American culture that people are doing less and less sleepovers, just because now we're just more aware of dangers that can occur and all that. But if you read more and more articles, the parenting culture has shifted from allowing sleepovers to not again. So that's kind of how you can think of culture. It's a belief system based on something that's been influenced you by those who shape you. So worldviews, this is how individuals perceive the world, right? Some people have worldviews that perceive the world as a dangerous place. Some people have a worldview as they perceive the world as a wonderful place where everybody just wants to be kind to one another. It's unique to each person and it's influenced by culture. So when you're thinking about culture in healthcare, you might be thinking about particular groups, right? There's races and there's ethnicity. And two things I just really quickly would like to differentiate. Race and ethnicity are not the same thing. So making sure you understand that. And for example, somebody might be South African. It's not the same as someone who says, well, I'm from East Africa. Those are two different ethnicities. Now, race apostrophe S are also different. So for example, when they ask on the checkbox, they'll say, what race are you? And some people will say Asian, white Hispanic, non-white Hispanic. I'm not sure if they put African American or non-American African, something along those lines. And then ethnicity is more like Latino, right? You might put African American. You might put Indian Asian. So that's just something that's distinct. There's religion groups, there's nationalities, there's regions of countries, states, and others. So like clubs, professions, gender. You might say, oh, even in our nursing milieu, we talk about different professions of nursing, right? So they'll be like, well, you know her. She's a CVICU nurse, right? They're like crazy anal retentive. Or, you know, those ER nurses, they love adrenaline. Or, oh, those OR nurses are just, really vigilant and they know how to run an OR, blah, blah, blah. Oh, those hemonc nurses and hospice nurses full of compassion, love, home health nurses, they're so good at directing families. Like we all have kind of these different ideas behind a certain group, right? Or I always say this, men, they're not good at multitasking. So again, these are all those kind of influences that you get. So race is an anthropologic category, Caucasian or white. I don't know why they put Negroid or black. I don't like that. Mongoloid or yellow. That's weird. And I guess we don't really use those terms that often. So the U.S. consensus form, they use white, black, African American or Negro, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian or Pacific Islander or other. Ethnicity is a derivative of ethnos, meaning of nation and people, and it refers to a large group of people with shared identities, so African, Cuban, English, French. And it's erroneous to presume ethnicity of others because people have multiple ethnicities, or they have one, but they were adopted and raised in another, or they have two ethnicities, but they maybe really recognize one other. And then religion is their belief system. It's usually associated with an organization. And again, it's an erroneous assumption made from different forms. So a really good example is I take care of a lot of refugee patients from the Middle East, and many people wear the hijab, which is the traditional head covering. Many women do. And I had asked them if they were going to celebrate Ramadan, and they said, no, we're actually not Muslim. And I said, oh, I apologize. I'm actually not up to speed on everything. I thought if you were Muslim, you wore the hijab. And they said, traditionally, it was probably like that, but now it's become more cultural, just to wear the traditional hijab. So, I made an assumption that these people were going to be practicing Ramadan because I assumed they're Muslim because they wore a hijab, and quite actually they weren't. And it's erroneous to assume that if somebody says that they practice a religion, even if it's listed, so oftentimes people will, on forms they'll say they're Catholic, and then you'll offer them like healing of the sick, and the spiritual counselor comes in and they're like, wow, I don't want that, or that a person's not religious even if it's not listed, right? Or that if someone's religious, that they want to share their religion with you. Nationality refers to a country of origin, and there's varying attitudes that exist in the US. So a lot of hyphenated American, right? Mexican American, Polish American, etc., and then non-hyphenated American. Some may say I'm Swiss German, I'm Swiss Italian, and that's where they get their nationality. And then there's labels. All group terms use place labels on people, and that oftentimes can depersonalize a person and take away from their actual individuality. It dehumanizes people, and it also categorizes and ranks people, and it's often used incorrectly. So cultural pride, the United States has that melting pot ideal, and when you think about the melting pot, it kind of suppresses culture, right? Because it's the idea that it all melts together and one runs into another. Whereas we know that's not true. Some people like to call it salad bowl now because people tend to maintain a lot of their cultural identity. And with cultural pride, differences are often valued. So when you're talking about cultural competence, there's something called emic and etic perspectives. With emic, it's the insider's viewpoint, a person's perspective. And the etic is outsider's viewpoint, how one is perceived. So other perspectives, those who are appreciating, respecting, accepting, and incorporating it into patient care. So general components of a cultural assessment is race, ethnicity, nationality, and religion. And you also want to consider particular groups, lifestyle, communication styles, and then cultural attitudes, beliefs, values, and practices. Cultural assessment. So the demographic considerations, you think name, gender, religious or spiritual faith, or race, ethnicity, date of birth and age, and birthplace, and where they were raised. And that actually makes a big deal, right? If somebody's from an older generation, from a different ethnicity, it might affect the way you approach them. Other aspects to a demographic considerations: marital status, generation in the US, years in the US, languages spoken, education, and occupation. So cultural domains, general cultural patterns or lifestyles, values, norms, and expressions, tattoos and myths, and the worldview. You have ethnocentrism and mediocentrism. Life-caring rituals and rites of passage, and we think of wellness, illness, cultural systems like lay people and professionals. Cultural domains, we think of caring behaviors, cultural changes and acculturations of family and non-family. And then also understand that we live in a multicultural society. Importance of cultural consciousness, cultural cataloging is often inaccurate and incongruent.
I think of diversity in terms of a lot of different things: family composition, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation. Really, there's many different ways that we can be similar or different to people. Really, what this movement ultimately should be striving for is to have equality in how we treat people, regardless of how they're like us or not like us.
First of all, it's a patient safety issue. We need cultural competency now in our hospitals. We need to have patients understand the dynamics of their patient care and what that is all about. And we also know from the literature that when we understand the culture and we communicate in ways that the patient understands, the patient is more receptive on their discharge instructions and what they need to do to take care of themselves.
It's really been a culmination of forces in our society, as well as the changing demographics in the United States. In 20 years, the face of this country is going to look decidedly different. I mean, we really have been able to recognize the disparities that exist in healthcare, and I think it's all coming to a head.
With the Nursing Workforce Diversity Initiative that we've been working on for a number of years now, a number of work groups met, and there was one group that worked on curriculum and staff development. And it was that group that came up with a definition of what cultural competence is and how broad it is, and had a lot of discussion about that. And that led to the idea that we really needed to do the awareness pieces, the cultural competence pieces, before we could really work on other avenues of diversifying the nursing workforce. Our goal is to reduce health disparities, but it's foundational to be culturally competent and culturally aware.
We really need to add diversity to our workforce, and the only way to do that is to make our nursing education and practice sites more culturally sensitive. Although healthcare isn't a high priority of the foundation, education is, however. We do believe that a healthy community and a strong healthcare workforce are key to everything else we do. I really researched it and started working with the nurses. I learned so much more about how healthcare that is not culturally sensitive can interfere with health outcomes.
So the purpose of all of this, of increasing the cultural competence of the nursing workforce, is to improve the care that clients and families receive in the healthcare system, and beyond that, to reduce healthcare disparities in our country. When we talk about cultural competence, we're really talking about the ability of the healthcare provider to step into the intercultural space and understand the differences that exist between themselves and the client that they're taking care of. One way for students to get into the intercultural space is to have a clinical experience. Another way for them to get into the intercultural space is through case studies that we might do in the classroom, and also through simulation.
The OCN definition of diversity has been really critical for us because obviously we're looking at more than skin color and language. We're talking about so many different levels of diversity, including gender, sexual identity, religions, the list goes on. And something that has been so exciting about this project is as students started to hear more and more about diversity and cultural competency into the simulations, we started to have students approach us as content experts. For example, we had a student that asked whether or not we had considered integrating a transgendered patient into our simulation program. One of our faculty had already started to do that research. However, the student then became a content expert. She went on to share with us that her partner is transgendered and that she would be happy to share what it's like to be a family and in the healthcare system.
And the key is to even recognize that that diversity exists and that not everybody sees the world and shares the values and beliefs that we bring to the table, and to open up an honest communication so that we can acknowledge that those differences do exist and be able to talk about them. Right now, our staff represents somewhere between 25 and 30 different ethnicities, and that's part of the cultural diversity of our staff. Then you also need to take into consideration the differences in culture among generations, among genders, and even among socioeconomic lines, educational lines, and what part of the country you were raised in, or even what part of the city you were raised in. All of those are going to be part of the culture you bring to the workforce. A perfect world would be one that everybody could communicate, feel respected, feel valued, and where there was true collaboration and no feeling of hierarchy. In a perfect world, we would have a nursing workforce that is culturally diverse, mirrors the population that we serve, be understanding, compassionate, smart, make good decisions, and help our citizens make good decisions. And I think we would have healthier people.
For clinicians to really change their practice, I think it's important for us to step back and take time to really look at what are some of the assumptions, what are some of the beliefs that we've been operating on, and to try to peel that back to where did that come from, where did we learn that, and then to be open to new knowledge, new information, again from research and from our colleagues. I think that's the way that we can really have practice changes that will be sustainable.
It really doesn't take that much to get to that point where people begin to understand just how big an issue this is.
The concept is not a new one. We have come to a different realization about its importance. I think the pendulum has swung way to biomedicine, and I think it's time to swing back. And I am so excited about the future of nursing because we are just right on the forefront of we have to do this. It's time.